My stepmother forced me to marry a billionaire in a wheelchair, but what I discovered that night was far more complicated than anyone expected. The lilies hit me first. Not the man in the wheelchair, not the king-sized bed in the center of a suite that cost more per night than my father's monthly mortgage payment. Not even the silence, that thick, suffocating quiet that swallows you whole when you realize that everyone who was supposed to protect you has left you alone in a room with a stranger. It was the lilies, white, perfect, arranged in a crystal vase on a mahogany table like someone had staged the room for a funeral. And standing there in a wedding dress I hadn't picked, married to a man whose last name I'd only learned 4 weeks ago, I thought, this is what being sold feels like. It smells like flowers. My name is Adrienne Calloway. I'm 24 years old. I was a junior graphic designer at a mid-sized marketing firm in Chicago until 8 months ago, when my stepmother, Lydia, sat me down at our kitchen table on a Tuesday evening, a Tuesday like it was nothing, and told me that my father's company was going to collapse unless I agreed to marry Jonathan Pierce. Let me back up. My father, Gerald Calloway, built Calloway Construction from a 2-truck operation in 1994 into a regional firm worth roughly $40 million at its peak. He is the most decent man I have ever known. He coached my soccer teams until I aged out. He cried at every birthday. He kept a photo of my late mother in his breast pocket until the day he met Lydia, and even then, he only moved it to his bedside table because she asked him to, not demanded. Asked. That's the thing about Lydia. She never demanded anything. She asked, she suggested, she guided, always with that soft mouth and those measured eyes and that particular silence she deployed when she wanted you to feel like the unreasonable one. She was 41. My father was 53. They met at a charity gala for children's hospitals, which I now recognize as both ironic and deeply on brand for a woman like her. She wore emerald green that night. My father came home flustered in a way I hadn't seen since my mother was alive, and I thought, good for him. I thought that for 2 full years. I should have looked at her hands. Lydia never fidgeted, never tapped a finger, never twisted a ring, never showed the small physical tells that give people away. She was the most still person I had ever met. At the time, I called it grace. It wasn't grace. It was practice. Calloway Construction hit serious trouble about 3 years into their marriage. I knew the broad strokes. A commercial development deal in the western suburbs fell apart when the primary investor pulled out. My father lost a significant contract with the city. Cash flow dried up in ways that quietly cascaded. He was stressed, quieter than usual, eating less at family dinners. What I did not know, what none of us knew, was that the company wasn't just struggling. It was being systematically hollowed out. But that part comes later. The Tuesday evening, Lydia sat me down. She was wearing a cream blouse with small buttons. She folded her hands on the table. She looked at me with something that I can only now identify as practiced sorrow, the kind you manufacture when you want someone to feel like you're suffering together. Your father is going to lose everything, she said. The company, the house, his pension, his name, unless we do something. What kind of something? She slid a folder across the table. Inside was information about a man named Jonathan Pierce, 41 years old, heir to Pierce Capital, a private equity firm managing assets north of $800 million. Widower, no children. Recently relocated to Chicago from New York after a degenerative spinal condition had confined him to a wheelchair 3 years prior, and he was looking for a wife. He's reached out through a private intermediary, Lydia said, watching my face. He's willing to clear your father's debts, all of them, and invest in the company's restructuring in exchange for a marriage. I stared at her. An arranged marriage, I said flatly. A beneficial arrangement. She said it the way you might say business lunch. Bland, purposeful, scrubbed of any horror. It's not uncommon in certain circles, Adrienne. It's how wealth has always moved. I am not wealth. No, she agreed, with the faintest pause that contained a universe of condescension. But you are an asset. I want to say I refused right then. I want to tell you I stood up and flipped that folder across the room and called a lawyer. I didn't. I thought about my father, about the way he'd looked at the dinner table 3 weeks before, thin and gray and diminished in a way that terrified me, like he was being quietly erased. I thought about the house he'd built himself, the business he'd bled for 30 years to construct. I thought, maybe I'm overreacting. That's what Lydia counted on. She'd spent 2 years calibrating exactly how much I would absorb before I broke, and she knew I hadn't hit that number yet. Love doesn't pay the bills, she said softly. Responsibility does. I signed the agreement 4 days later. I met Jonathan Pierce exactly twice before the wedding. The first meeting was a dinner at a private club on Michigan Avenue. He arrived in a sleek black motorized wheelchair, wearing a charcoal suit so well-tailored it looked architectural. He was taller than I'd expected, even seated. There was a length to him that suggested significant height. Dark hair going silver at the temples, eyes the color of lake water in November, a gray-green that absorbed light without reflecting much back. He asked me 3 questions the entire evening: what I did for work, where I'd gone to school, and whether I preferred red or white wine. I told him graphic design, University of Illinois, and white. He nodded, ordered a bottle of Chablis, and spent the next 40 minutes talking to his attorney about a real estate portfolio in Vancouver. I stared at the breadbasket and tried to feel something definitive enough to stop this. Nothing came. The second meeting was a brief legal appointment where we both signed documents I only half understood, while a man named Edward Holt, Pierce Capital's general counsel, 17 years in corporate law, explained the framework of the arrangement in a tone normally reserved reserved for tax filings. 7 days later, I was in a white dress in a chapel in River North, walking toward a stranger while my father wept in the second row, and Lydia sat beside him with her hands folded, the picture of a gracious stepmother. 43 guests, flowers that cost more than my monthly salary, a reception with food I couldn't eat because my stomach had sealed itself shut somewhere around the rehearsal dinner. Nobody said what it actually was, a transaction. I was merchandise, beautifully wrapped. The hotel suite had 2 rooms. Jonathan's assistant, a precise woman named Clara Voss, had arranged everything: the lilies, the temperature, the specific bottle of water on my nightstand. Clara was 36, had worked for Jonathan for 11 years, and had the quiet efficiency of someone who had been briefed on every possible scenario and planned accordingly. I wondered, standing by the window in my dress, if she'd been briefed on this one. Jonathan rolled to the center of the room and stopped. We looked at each other in the way that 2 people look at each other when the situation has already become absurd and the only options are honesty or performance. "Would you like help getting ready for bed?" I asked, because I didn't know what else a wife was supposed to say to a stranger on their wedding night. "That won't be necessary." His voice was flat, not unkind, just stripped of everything extraneous, pleasantry, warmth, social cushioning, like a room with all the furniture removed. He reached for the armrests of the wheelchair. I watched him position his hands, careful, deliberate, and push himself upward. He swayed once, and the instinct to help hit me faster than thought. I stepped forward without processing the decision. Careful, we collided, badly. I caught his arm, he caught the edge of the console table, and somehow we both went sideways. Me into the floor, him half crouched against the table with one hand braced. My face was burning. I scrambled up, already apologizing, already mentally cataloging every stupid thing I'd done in the last month that led me to this room, this moment. His hand locked around my wrist, not roughly, but absolutely, with a certainty that made me go still. He straightened, not carefully, not with the cautious, compensating movement of a man who had lost the use of his legs and was working with partial function. He straightened like a man standing up from a chair, smooth, controlled, fully loaded, 6 feet tall, completely steady. The wheelchair sat behind him like a costume left on a stage. The room tilted, or I did. The lilies blurred on the table. "Relax," he said. "No one's watching anymore." I heard myself say it from somewhere far away. "You can walk." "Yes." "For how long?" He looked at me, that lakewater gaze, unblinking. 5 years. I sat down on the floor, right there, on the white carpet in my wedding dress, because my legs made that decision without consulting me. 5 years. 5 years of headlines. Jonathan Pierce, tragic heir, confined to a wheelchair at 36 following complications from a degenerative spinal condition. I had read those articles in the 4 weeks before the wedding. Lydia had presented them as due diligence, as evidence of what kind of man I was marrying, a man broken by circumstance and in need of partnership and stability. Pierce Capital stock had fluctuated for 2 years on the uncertainty of who would lead the firm after Jonathan's condition worsened. 5 years of business meetings and boardrooms and charity galas, all observed from a chair, nobody questioned. 5 years of people speaking around him and over him and about him, as though disability had also removed his ability to think. "People forget you can still think," he said, watching me process this from the floor. "Still here, still build a case." "Why?" I managed. He walked to the table and picked up a folder. He opened it and set it in front of me, and it took me a moment to understand that he'd been waiting for this exact moment, that the folder was already there. "Your stepmother approached me 8 months ago," he said, "through an intermediary she believed was discreet. She presented the arrangement as a business proposition. A young woman in financial straits, a family desperate to keep its assets intact, and a lonely, dependent man who would be grateful for companionship." He paused, and easily managed. I looked down at the folder. Loan documents, financial transfers, authorization forms. My father's company name appearing on instruments he had never described to me, linked to accounts I didn't recognize. My father's signature on every page, except it wasn't his signature. I'd grown up watching my father sign checks, birthday cards, permission slips. His handwriting had a particular backward slant, a wide lower loop on the G. These signatures were close, practiced close, studied close, but wrong. "She forged his signature," I said. The words came out flat, like a diagnosis. "Repeatedly, over 18 months. The transfers total slightly over $4 million, routed through 3 shell entities she established in Delaware." Jonathan sat down in a chair, a regular chair, just a chair, across from me. "She structured it to look like your father was embezzling from his own company. If the scheme completed, his business collapsed and he faced criminal liability. She would emerge as the surviving party, with community property claims on whatever remained." I thought about the way he'd looked at those dinners, thin and gray and diminished. He wasn't just stressed, he was being robbed by his wife, while she told me it was to save him. The air in my lungs turned into something solid and wrong. My hands found the edge of the folder and gripped it. "Why are you telling me this?" I asked. My voice was steadier than it had any right to be. Jonathan looked at me the way you look at someone you've been watching from a distance for a long time. Not unkindly, but with the particular focus of someone who has formed an assessment and is checking it against the reality in front of them. "Because you're not part of it," he said. "You married a stranger to protect someone you love. That's different." He reached past me and turned to the second page of the folder. "And because I need a witness for what comes next." We didn't sleep. We sat at that table until the window went from black to charcoal to the bleak gray pink of early early Chicago morning, going through every document, every transfer, every forged signature. Jonathan had been building this case for 8 months. From the moment Lydia's intermediary first made contact, he had understood exactly what she was and had started documenting accordingly. He explained it without drama, the way you explain something you've spent a long time organizing. Pierce Capital's internal forensic accounting team, led by Marcus Webb, a certified fraud examiner with 22 years in financial crime, had traced every transaction. They had metadata on the emails Lydia had used. They had comparison analysis on the forged signatures conducted by Dr. Patricia Holm, a forensic document examiner who had testified in 43 federal cases. And they had phone records. Lydia had been careful, but confident people get sloppy. It's one of the most reliable facts about human nature. When you believe you've already won, you stop checking your blind spots. You start spending money that isn't yours yet. She'd started moving funds 3 months before the wedding. She'd opened a personal account in the Cayman Islands under a trust structure. She'd booked a property in Tuscany. She'd already mentally relocated. She thought you would be so overwhelmed by the marriage that you'd be manageable, Jonathan said around 4 a.m., both of us on our second coffee. And she thought I'd be so relieved to have companionship that I'd hand her access within 6 months. Power of attorney, estate co-management. He paused. She told her attorney she expected the full estate transfer within 2 years. Her attorney knew? Her attorney drafted the framework. He's been disbarred before. His name is Richard Alton. Jonathan slid a page toward me. He's also been formally retained as a cooperating witness since last Tuesday. I stared at that. Richard Alton had flipped. I looked at the man across from me. This stranger I'd married 12 hours ago. This man who had spent 5 years in a wheelchair watching people reveal themselves, who had seen Lydia coming from 8 months away, and had walked into the arrangement with a full hand of cards, while she held what she thought was the only deck. You let her run the whole thing, I said slowly. You let her think it was working. I needed the complete picture. Partial evidence invites legal challenge. He took a sip of coffee. And I needed her to be certain she'd won. Certain people don't retain lawyers. I thought about her face at the wedding, that small, satisfied smile she'd worn behind my bouquet. She'd been celebrating. When does it end? I asked. 1 week. I will not pretend that week was easy. I went back to my father's house twice. Once to pick up clothes, once for a dinner that Lydia had arranged with all the warmth of a woman who believed she was days away from a Tuscan villa. I sat across from her and watched her manage my father, touching his arm at the right moments, steering the conversation away from any topic that might crack her surface. And I felt something cold and exact settle into my chest. Not rage. Rage is hot and disorganized. This was something more like focus. On Tuesday evening, I received a call from Detective Renata Okafor of the Chicago Financial Crimes Unit. She'd been working the case in parallel with Pierce Capital's team for 6 weeks. 17 years on the force, the last 8 in financial crimes. She walked me through what I needed to do, how to behave, what to say. She was matter-of-fact in the way that people are when they've seen enough human damage to stop being surprised by it. But she was also, and this matters, kind. Your father has no idea, she said. It wasn't a question. None. That's going to be hard for him. Yes, he'll be okay. The forensics are clean. His signature is exonerated on every document. A pause. You should know that the house is protected. The evidence of her forgery releases his liability entirely. I breathed out. On Thursday, I received an email from Edward Holt, Pierce Capital's general counsel, with a PDF marked Exhibit D in the subject line. It contained a complete legal summary of the charges being filed: wire fraud, forgery, financial elder abuse, conspiracy to commit theft by deception. The number at the top of the filing was $4.2 million. Exhibit D also contained on the last page a note that had been written by Lydia herself, a handwritten letter to Richard Alton, outlining the final stage of the plan, in her own handwriting, the handwriting she'd trained herself never to use on the forgeries. Pride. That was her last blind spot. She'd trusted her attorney with the original document because she was proud of the plan. She wanted it documented in her hand. She'd signed her own indictment. The family meeting was called for Saturday morning at 10 a.m. My father's estate attorney, a man named Arthur Chin, who had known our family for 15 years, arranged the meeting at his office on Wacker Drive. He told my father it was a financial review, routine, given the company's restructuring. Lydia arrived in a cream blazer. She always wore cream when she wanted to look innocent. She sat across the table from me, and for one moment, just one, I watched her eyes move across the room, calculating. They landed on Jonathan and softened with the practiced warmth she deployed for powerful men. They moved to the lawyers and registered nothing. They moved to me, and something shifted. Not fear, not yet. Just a small recalculation, the kind you make when the variables don't quite add up. She didn't know about the wheelchair. She thought she was walking into a restructuring meeting with a controlled woman and a compliant husband. Jonathan's legal team lead, a woman named Isabel Crane, 26 years in financial litigation, partner at Crane & Associates, placed a binder on the table. Lydia looked at it. Her fingers didn't move toward it. People who are innocent reach for documents. People who are guilty calculate first. Mrs. Calloway, Isabel said, in the tone of someone who has delivered this kind of news many times and has stopped cushioning it because cushioning doesn't help. These documents represent a comprehensive forensic record of wire fraud, forgery, and attempted theft totaling $4,200,000 conducted over an 18-month period using fraudulent instruments bearing Calloway Construction's Jonathan's name. She paused. Formal charges have been filed with the U.S. Attorney's Office as of Thursday. A warrant has been issued. The room was absolutely quiet. My father made a sound, small, confused, like a man hearing a language he almost recognizes. Lydia looked at Isabel. She looked at Arthur Chin. She looked at Jonathan. Then she looked at me, and I watched it happen. The mask moving. Not all at once. In stages, like ice breaking up in spring. The warm competence flickering. The stillness cracking at the edges. The cream blazer suddenly looking very thin against whatever was happening underneath it. I looked back at her. I didn't smile. I didn't need to perform anything. I just sat there and let her see that I'd known. That the woman she'd handed to a stranger as a pawn had spent a week sitting at a table with that stranger, going through every page of what she'd built, until there was nothing left she could hide behind. She opened her mouth. The door opened first. Detective Okafor and a colleague entered from the hallway. They were quiet about it. Professional. No theater. The handcuffs clicked. Lydia said my name once, very quietly, as they walked her out. Just my name. Adrienne. Like she was trying to remind me of something, appeal to something. I watched her go. I thought about the cream blazer, about the Tuesday evening at the kitchen table with the folder and the folded hands, and the line she'd handed me like wisdom. Love doesn't pay the bills. She was right about that, actually. Love doesn't pay bills. But arrogance, as it turns out, also doesn't. My father sat in his chair for a long time after she was gone. Arthur Chin spoke quietly to him, walking him through the forensics, through the exoneration of his signature, through the asset recovery process that Pierce Capital's team had already initiated. He listened with the expression of a man who is hearing that a foundational thing about his world has been removed. I sat beside him. I put my hand on his arm. He looked at his own hands for a while. I should have seen it, he said. She was very good, I said. You saw it. I didn't correct him. I hadn't seen it. I'd been as blind as anyone. I'd signed the agreement, walked the aisle, handed myself over because she'd made it look like sacrifice. Jonathan had seen it. Jonathan had been watching from the chair nobody questioned, building the case from the first moment she approached him. She'd chosen him because she thought he was vulnerable. She'd been wrong about that too. 3 months later, my father's company restructured with investment capital from Pierce Capital. It's smaller now, lean but stable. He's back to working, back to eating dinner. The photo of my mother is back in his breast pocket. Richard Alton, Lydia's attorney, received a disbarment confirmation and is cooperating fully in exchange for reduced sentencing. Mao. Patricia Holmes' forensic document analysis was entered as evidence in what the Tribune, in a brief story buried on page 8, called a financial fraud scheme targeting a prominent Chicago family. Lydia's trial date is set. She's currently in a 2-bedroom apartment in Evanston under the terms of her release. No Tuscany, no estate, no cream blazer that means anything. As for Jonathan and me, we're figuring it out. That's the most honest thing I can say. We sit at tables and talk, sometimes until the window goes from black to charcoal. He still doesn't fidget. I've started to read it differently, not as coldness, as the particular stillness of someone who spent 5 years being underestimated and learned to be very still and very watchful while the world revealed itself. I understand that now. He asked me once, about a month after everything collapsed, why I hadn't been angrier at him. For the arrangement, for the wedding, I thought about it. You needed a witness, I said, and you needed someone Lydia would actually try to use. I paused. I was both. He was quiet for a moment. Is that enough? I thought about the lilies in the hotel suite, about cream blazers, about the particular violence of being told that your love for someone doesn't constitute something real, that it can be packaged and transferred and leveraged by someone who doesn't have any of it. Ask me in a year, I said. He nodded. That was enough.